Welcome to another brand new episode of CPOV Autographs. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. And before we get into the new episode, I just want to restate something that I already did post on the social media for Autographs, and that's that this show is shifting to a monthly format instead of bi-weekly. Mostly just because I'm having trouble keeping up with the editing and production and booking and recording of this show, along with all of the other work that I'm doing. And since this one is completely a personal project that I do by myself without anybody else, it made the most sense to cut this one back. It's just going to make things easier. So starting with this episode, this show will now be monthly. It will air on the third week of the month, still on Tuesdays. And I've got some great stuff lined up for the rest of the year, for the next 2 months, and then also some big cool stuff for next year. So while it'll be less frequent, it won't be less awesome. And so I thank you for your patience and understanding as we make this shift. I also want to thank the guests of this episode, Pretty Bitter, who I recorded this with, I think, 4 weeks ago at this point, and they were super understanding when I made the shift. And I'm excited for you to hear this episode. This interview is incredible. I'm chatting with Emelia, Zack, and Miri. Jason and Chris couldn't join me for the recording, but I got to talk to 3 of the 5 members of Pretty Bitter and talk about their new record, Hinges, talk about creating this record in the pandemic, the kinds of things we went through during isolation, and of course, so much more. It was incredibly insightful, awesome, and fun conversation with these 3 humans. I really adored it. I've become such a big fan of this band and this record in quarantine, thanks to the folks over at Jukebox Vertigo. And so I won't keep rambling. I will just defer to this incredible interview that I did with Zack, Emelia, and Miriam of Pretty Bitter. All right, I am so excited. I am here with 2 of the members of Pretty Bitter. I am talking to Em and Zack. Em and Zack, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I discovered y'all through the incredible folks over at Jukebox Vertigo during their Pride episode, which we were both featured on. And I've been obsessed with your latest record, Hinges, ever since, listening to it constantly. I've always loved kind of indie music with a variety of influences. And indie has become such a broad term now that I haven't found bands lately that defined like what I remember indie was like in the 2000s, which is so long ago at this point. And so I guess
5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Really
5
not
years
that
ago.
long.
We're good.
Yeah. But I want to talk a little about Pretty Bitter and like the origin of your sound. Obviously, you do have a very kind of like indie rock, kind of alt kind of sound, but like, is that what y'all envisioned as you first started to build the band, or did it kind of just shake out that way based on your influences? Like, what was the kind of early days of Pretty Bitter?
So, I mean, for this one, so Pretty Bitter used to be under a different name. We used to go by the name Nah, and it was started by neither Zack nor I were in the original lineup, and it sounded a lot different. And then honestly, even when, so I came in first. So Miriam's the one who started the band.
Okay.
I came in first. Zack was added almost immediately after. And honestly, like I would credit a lot of the kind of honing into the sound that we have now on Zack being in the band, because Zack has this just absolutely incredible way to put like we'll talk about what we want something to sound like, and then Zack will be like, oh yeah, sure, and then he'll send it the next day and it's exactly what you imagined in your brain. So I think that honestly, like having quarantine and having to collaborate digitally really helped us kind of hone in on a more specific sound that we had been talking about moving toward for years.
Zack, to that point, I'm curious like where your influences lie. I mean, this album is all over the place in the best way. Like there's definitely a through line for it, a story, but like it goes slow, picks up. Like, I mean, Final Girl is one of my favorite tracks because it fits to the full arc of the record. But had it been on a different record, I feel like it would work too. Like it's kind of this standout of like, this is a genre thing, right? And also I love it because it feels like a horror movie, if that makes sense, right? Like the synths and everything else. So talk a little bit about like the structure of the record and like why this one was different, why it has this kind of arc and flow.
Well, the funny thing about M saying that that they can send me stuff and I can like come up with I can translate it into sound comes from hundreds of hours of sitting alone in my room working on stuff. So it's not in any way glamorous at all, but at least it helps for making records. And actually, Final Girl's a good example of one where actually Miri and M wrote it and sent me, like vocals and bass. I think it was just vocals and bass and like sort of the structure. And then they were like, so we kind of want the end to be like the end of a horror movie, but not like a horror movie soundtrack, but like a rock thing. But like, you get, what we're trying to say, like that kind of thing. And I was like, maybe, I don't know.
I think that the exact words used were, hey, Zach, can you make this sound like an 80s horror movie? Like add a little bit of cheese to it, like.
That's right. That was another piece of it. Yeah. And, it's, you hear that and then you try your best to filter that through what all those words mean to you all, and then what all those words mean to me on the other side of that, the digital divide, right? And it's interesting because I would say if we had tried to do that the way we were writing music before the pandemic, which is everybody in a room with their instruments plugged in, noodling, trying to talk to each other, and like just the sort of the chaos of that, which is one way of writing music that can produce great ideas. I don't think it would have came out the way that it did when it was digital, and it was just like, here's an idea, we volley it over to your side of the court, and then we wait to see what comes back the other side. And whatever I associate to when they say 80s horror movie, cheesy, but like using this vibe, that's what I'll send back, and then we can keep going back and forth. But that's how we made the record. So I think a lot of it is that it's like the slowing down of that communication process to say, I have an idea, and then I can actually listen and process what the idea that they shared was, as opposed to when you're in a room, like a practice space, and somebody says something and then three people make a joke about it and then and it's just very different. Speaking more to the idea of like the arc of the album, I think it was again a thing where because we were all separated, it slowed the whole thing down a lot. So we could send a demo and sit on it for a while and then see how it made us feel. And then the next demo could come through 2 or 3 weeks later, and we could sit on it for a while and see how it made us feel. And because if you're stretching it out that much, obviously the music I'm listening to 3 weeks ago is going to be different than the music I'm listening to 3 weeks later. But at the same time, there's some sense of wanting to go in a new direction, not necessarily being able to put words to it. Maybe Emelia could put words to it. I don't know. And so we're all aiming towards something, but stretching this process out over a long time. And in the end, we ended up with something that was cohesive somehow, even though, as you say, it's rather eclectic. So
yeah, I mean, also like the fact that we were all recording from different places. Like Zack was in his basement, and then Miri and I were in this like horrible little 1-bedroom apartment. So all of the bass tracks, all of the vocal tracks happened in the closet of that 1-bedroom apartment. So I mean, Zack and I have talked about this. I had a full-blown breakdown about Fashionable Exit because I wrote 7 different sets of lyrics for it, and none of them, and like all of them had different melodies. None of them felt good to me. I was like, this song is never getting done, and it makes me angry. Like every time I listen to it, I'm mad. And then, I took a week away, like had the ability to, kind of separate myself from it, listened to, I got way back into Rilo Kiley over the pandemic. So I like listened to their whole discography, and then I was like, oh, you know what? I'll give it another try. And then as soon as I did, it came out with the final version, I guess, of what the melody and lyrics for that were. So it was nice to be able to have that space and kind of not feel the pressure to have those written, within a 10-minute span or a 30-minute span or however long you practice for together.
Yeah, I mean, I think stepping away from something can always be helpful. I've found like even if I get to a challenging point in a video game that I keep dying on, or like if I am like, struggling to write something or whatever, like stepping away and coming back to it hours later, days later, like lets your brain kind of reset and like revisualize. I want to welcome Miriam to the pod as well, joined mid-recording, but we're happy to have you. Thank you for being here, Miriam.
Oh, hey. Yes, sorry about that. I am so sorry. Hello.
No worries.
I'm sorry I was late. I just woke up. Good morning.
Good morning. No worries. We're happy to have you as well. While you're here, Miriam, though, I do want to talk a little bit to the experience of like, so Em and Zack mentioned that you were the founding member of the band and that you've been in this band since the beginning and since the shift. And like, talk a little bit about that experience and what you were looking for out of this transition into a different sound and a different name, and like figuring out what this band really was going to like kind of blossom into.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can definitely speak to that. I definitely started it like the through line in my eyes is has been there the whole time, and that through line is just that like I started writing music when I was a teenager as a sort of therapy for myself, and like, oh, I need to do some reflection, some looking inward, and I didn't really have like a lot of resources or like actual tools to be able to do that. So I just did what I knew how to do, which was write and play music about it. I think in terms of like the shift and the transition of this band is like once I got like surrounded myself with such amazing musicians and such other brilliant songwriters, it kind of just like it took form from there. Like I don't know, like I think that like we do it holds really true to like that same, first of all, the era of music that I was very much sort of like in my headphones at the time when I was like starting to make music. I think that like we sound more like that now than we ever had. I was listening to like a lot of Passion Pit and like some Motion City soundtrack and stuff like that. And I feel like the sound really translates. And like the thing is that like was getting Jason in to play drums for us. And Jason and I have been like really good friends for years. And so like it's that healing connection of like being just in a band and in this group of people full of people that I trust, and like that continuing that healing in a way that like, yeah, I really intended to set out with at the beginning.
I mean, the thing I think, the reason I was saying before you got on, Miriam, that I really latched on to Hinges and I've been obsessed with this record since I first heard it. And I think part of it is I'm a very emotionally queer person who is like still figuring themselves out. And there's so much honesty in this record, especially in the lyrics and in the musicianship. And like, I think a lot about BDI/lore. And like that whole tail end and the personal stuff and like the mantraing, the reciting to yourself, the admitting faults, the suffering. How does that must come out in the writing process and the creation process? Do you all feel like, and I guess you can try and speak for the other members who aren't here, like, do you feel like that earnestness is core to the writing and core to the creation, and that like personal experience is core to creating, especially for this record?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I can speak on it for just a second, like that, I am a very big proponent of the idea that like a lot of the musicians, a lot of the bands that I listened to growing up, had lyrical content that were dealing with some really hard shit. I mean, to minimize it. Right. But I have always been a really big proponent of like artists do not have to be in constant suffering in order to make good art, right? Like you should not have to dig yourself into a hole to put yourself in the worst, mental space possible in order to make good art, even though that was a lot of the art that I grew up on. So I think that like early on, there was a little bit of like self-lashing with certain lyrical content where it was like, I actually haven't healed from this, but I'm going to write about it because like, it hurts and whatever. But I think that the really cool thing with Hinges was that it was genuinely cathartic. And again, like going back to what Miriam said, being in a group of people that I wholeheartedly trust and love was like gave the space for that. And I do think that like, yeah, absolutely, that earnestness is core to the songwriting, but it's also like very much in the direction of like earnestness, but for the purpose of healing, right? Like talking about things, but also knowing that you have to deal with those things. It's something all of us go through, it's not, I don't know, if somebody hears that, and is like, I've had those feelings or those thoughts before. If one person feels that way, then it's like, cool, I've done my job because I'm being honest about my experiences, because we're all very complex people. We can be very happy, very sad, all the things in between. And I think that for me, like becoming more earnest with that, honestly was a big part of this record, was just writing more honestly, but not in a way that was self-destructive.
Can I build on that? You say I like when you mentioned that like yeah, if one person can relate to one of those specific feelings that like is laid out here, then yeah, we've done our job. I think that like all yeah, we all are very complex people and all like can experience this full range of emotion, right? But and at the same and like we all experience them very differently. But in my mind, the goal has always been to like every like to recognize how each different individual's experiences like shapes their own worldview and perspective, you know, but also having this sort of like laying it out in a way that is these complex feelings, trying to lay them out in a way that's simple enough that it's like we are also though all the same at the end of the day. Like we're all human beings on this earth trying to do the thing. And so even if like those complex feelings manifest differently in everybody, I think that like yeah, the goal of this band has always been earnestness in a very like simple way that like makes it accessible.
I love that.
I want to build on it even more by just saying this is like a band history thing, but I play with a lot of musicians and a lot of different bands and things. And the first time I came to practice with this particular band, back when it was under the previous name, I was also about to go to grad school. And I said, if grad school is too busy, y'all are the first group I'm going to drop because you're the new because you're the newest group and like whatever. And I play with a lot of people, so it's, you know, fine. But the experience, the experience of being with that group, I was like, oh, this hang is too good. Like this feels like this feels like a comfortable space to make music with people who are good at being artistic. And so that invites me as a musician to be like, oh, maybe this is actually a good place to offer some of my best ideas and be more authentic in what direction I think the music should go. Whereas maybe in another context, I might leave or be like, sure, we'll do a reggae thing. I don't really care. You know, I'm getting paid. Right. And so that earnestness flows through in that way too. And then it also, like you mentioned BDI in that question, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird how deep some of this stuff goes. That song started as just a instrumental demo that I sent, right? The ideas for that came from me watching 6 Feet Under, which is very much a show about
I can see
mental health and all kinds of stuff. And not just from 6 Feet Under, but also 6 Feet Under there's multiple episodes where they use music from the band Frou Frou. Mm-hmm. If you're familiar with that band. Mm-hmm. And I was not familiar with that band at the time. I knew Imogen Heap, but I didn't know that there was this other project that had happened.
Yeah.
And I was like blown away by that record that I discovered through that. So then BDI definitely was influenced by me watching the show at the time and wanting to make something like that. And then of course I send it over, and then the types of lyrics that Emelia comes up with for the song kind of wraps all the way back around to some of the experience of watching a show like that. And so it's just cool how that all flows together.
And like not knowing that when I was sent that,
right.
Like this
you
is
didn't
the
know that till right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm finding that out right now, which is cool because it's like, you know, I can hear that and be like, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to write a song, like, because over the pandemic, I did, you know, Beck's depression inventory like too many times just to check in with myself. And I'd been doing it so often that I was like, okay, I want to write a song that essentially is about like how do you love other people when you are going through really hard shit, and also like when you have dealt with mental illness your whole life, like what's the middle ground, what's fair. And when Zack sent me that, it was immediate. I was like, oh, this is the one that I'm going to write this to. So
we can go even deeper, Matt, because also in my professional life, I'm a therapist and I use the BDI all the time with my clients. And when the song came back and I was listening to the demo vocals that Emelia did, and the whole ending is just like reading the BDI, I was like, what? How did you know that this this just makes so much sense? So synergy, 6 Sigma synergy.
I mean, I love that. In the previous episode before yours, I was interviewing Schaefer the Dark Lord, and like he did a feature with a mutual friend of ours, Michael Kill, where it was about a shipwreck. and like they both intro the song, their verses the same, but they didn't speak to each other about it. Like it was Michael's song, and Schaefer just sent his verse, and I think it's been 10 years is the opening line, and they both start each verse the first verse the same way without discussing it, talking about it. Like that kind of professional kismet I think is so cool, and I see it more in indie work. I'm sure big pop stars have those moments too, but I feel like I just hear about it more from the indie artists. And like it just also, Zack, you were talking so specifically to the writing in a pandemic. Clearly Hinges is influenced by the pandemic. It's unavoidable, right? I think a lot of art right now is, my show included. But like she's pure astral light, or so she says. The reason I want to talk about that track, because as an intro track, it feels like an anomaly and not, right? Like it has the slow build of like a typical intro would, and then it builds into the drum and bass that like I think a lot of indie records you could see a kind of vibe with. But what's different is this is a longer track. It has those instrumental moments, those ethereal moments. And I'm just curious, writing a song like that in quarantine, volleying it back and forth, like, to me, this sounds like the kind of thing that you noodle through together and, like, it just comes to be. So talk about, like, that kind of process. Was this always the intro track? Did you, like, from the beginning when writing it, know this is how we're going to start the record? Or did that come through more later as you did more writing?
I think that came through. I think we were just working on songs. I think the order was a whole discussion that came later once all the songs were, like, mostly done. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. That I think that Zack can speak on this better than I can, and you can speak on this better than I can. But yeah, I mean, we were kind of working on all of them at the same time. So it was like, I mean, Miri and I were throwing ideas at Zack, and Zack was sending tracks to us, being like, okay, like put bass on this, put lyrics like right on top of this. And then Miri and I were doing the same thing to Zack. So I think at the end we were kind of just like, okay, we've got 10 of these. So how do we want to present them? You know,
I think in terms of how the track ended up the way it did, it's just when you are in quarantine by yourself, because the question you're asking is, it seems to have so many different parts that it flows through. You'd think you kind of noodle that together as a group, and then it would just kind of be what it was. And in fact, it was the exact opposite. It was me on like sitting at home by myself with no one to talk to, being like, and then what if this happened? And then just doing it because who cares? And that just sort of structuring it that way. And it basically had the same structure from the beginning. It started out as those like weird sounds at the beginning. That's actually, I was playing the harpsichord, and then I thought, what if I reversed the harpsichord? And like, ooh, that sounds cool. And then I was listening to a lot of like shoegaze, but more like modern. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Pink Shiny Ultra Blast.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah. I was listening to a lot of that and thinking, ooh, maybe something we could do on this record is go a little bit more in that direction of the wall of sound. So I started building up just wall of sound, see what would happen. This obviously needs a beat. Then like sort of a pop song appears in between the long intro and then the sort of long outro. And then you make it and you say, I don't know, what's everybody going to think of it? I'll just send it as it is. And people like it, and you just kind of work on it. And then it arrives as it is. And then to what Miri said, just way later, we have all these different tracks that we've been working on. They're all sort of somewhere close to being finished, and it starts to take shape. What order of songs feels like a story with ups and downs, or maybe one big up and then a down and then one big more up at the end, or something like that?
Conducive to like an emotional experience. Yeah,
for sure. And I will also say on a less something that's going to sound a lot less cool and put together is the order that the tracks came together in my iPod when I was walking around. Not my iPod, in my
your phone.
No, not my phone. I have
I
have a
on your Walkman.
My Walkman. I have a Sony. That's what it is. I have a Sony Walkman, which is like an MP3 player that I use so I don't have to be connected to the internet when I'm walking my dog and want to listen to music.
Nice.
And part of the set or the song order from the album also came from just the order that those songs randomly were occurring in my MP3 player and being like, this kind of works. I like the way this sounds.
I mean, I love that though. Like, we are so connected to our technology, and like whenever I listen, like I'm an album listener. Like, I like playlists. I'm a DJ. I make playlists, and I like listening to mixes. But like when I find an album I really vibe with, I want to hear the whole album, and I have to hear it from start to finish. And if I stop in the middle, I have to like continue from where I left off and get to the end. Like that's just kind of how my brain works. And what I've loved about your record is that the way it kind of loops on itself a little bit, intentional or not, the end does flow into the beginning very well. And I just think that comes from, it can be coincidence, it can be dire planning, but I think it's the talent and the quality of the work that really makes that happen. The fact that they kind of fell into place as a song list is a testament to how well all of these songs gel with each other. I want to take a moment before we get into your individual influences, and I want to talk a little bit about the album and the album cover specifically, because I'm fascinated by the album cover, this photo of a young woman making a very funny face. And so I'm curious if you could give a little light and history on who she is and like how this album cover came to be.
Absolutely. That is my grandma. And she was so she worked for Kodak in the 40s. She did like a little bit of modeling for Kodak, but she was also a scientist. She was a professor in a time where women weren't really in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And she was, and I say this with like the most respect that I possibly can, she was a brilliant woman who was also absolutely out of her mind. And it's, I mean, a lot of the album, honestly, I mean, lyrically, was kind of working through my own, like generational trauma, but also like the generational joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not just the sad stuff. But a lot of the lyrical content was me finally sitting still for the first time. I mean, since leaving home, right? Like in my late 20s, during the pandemic, just sitting still for the first time, being like, okay, where does all of this come from? And I've been in therapy for years, but it did give me like a moment to sit still and think, okay, like the women in my family are so, I mean, I'm so proud to come from them. But we also, all of us have a lot of problems with our brains. So it was kind of like we were sending back and forth. We knew for a while that we wanted it to be a picture of like something from one of our childhoods, or, like so we were sending back and forth, like just pictures of us as kids for a while. And we knew we wanted it to be a little bit eerie. And I didn't even think of it as an album cover, but I was like, oh, also, isn't this crazy? Look at this picture of my grandma that my mom just sent me. And everyone was like, well, that's it. Like that's the cover. But there's a double to that same picture where she's smiling, and it is really sweet. Like that picture of her is really sweet because it was just a tester photo for Kodak. But she does this face that she did, I mean, until the last week of her life. And it was kind of like a classic thing for her. But I do think that I don't know, it kind of matches, at least lyrically, what I was trying to go for with this album, where it's like, it's this really beautiful, like she could have just smiled, it's this really pretty woman. And she is making the most unnerving face you could possibly make, and making direct eye contact with you while doing it. So it's like, I don't know, for me, it just worked really well with like the history part of it, with a lot of the things that the lyrics talk about. But also, I mean, it's a creepy, weird, beautiful photo. And I was excited that they were down to have it as the cover.
Yeah, it's really striking, I think, which is why I wanted to ask about it. Because I had a feeling, just based on the coloring and everything, that it was either an old photo that you found on, like, through a stock photo thing, or it was related deeply to the band or a band member. And so it's very cool to hear that it's actually your grandmother. That's really neat. I want to talk a little bit about everyone's influences. Obviously, I can hear a lot of it, and you've talked a little bit about it. But, like, let's start with Emma and then go to Zack and then Miri. And, like, talk a little bit about, like, your history with music, and have you always wanted to be a musician, and kind of your way, finding your way to being in the band, like, your early days with music and how you kind of came to this place.
Yeah. So I was a big old musical theater kid. I was quite liberally. But I think that like to be entirely honest, my my introduction to music was musical theater. But I grew up in Austin, and my mom was very, very like, she wanted me to experience the arts. So she would bring me to concerts all the time. And I think that like the first recognizable thing is like I started listening to Bright Eyes, I started listening to Noah and the Whale, and I lyrically, I just something changed in the way that that I was listening to music. And I am someone who likes to read along with lyrics the first time that I listen to a song and like really get what you're saying. So like I was listening to a lot of early 2000s sad music, and I was also at the same time writing a lot of poetry. And I had a couple friends in high school who sort of played instruments, and all of us were like, yeah, we can do this. Like I can write words, you can sort of do stuff on GarageBand, let's make a band. So I was in a band in high school that was very fun, but writing
legitimately
like,
good
lyrics, writing lyrics and writing poetry at the same time was so interesting, because I was like, oh, they're the same, and how vastly different they are was really cool. But I was also, again, like listening to a lot of kind of narrative lyrics, like through like Connor Oberst and
of course.
Yeah. And like, and the storytelling there.
Yeah.
So it was, that was like really where it started for me, was with poetry, with musical theater, and then with the music of the early 2000s. Like I mentioned Rilo Kiley earlier, but Rilo Kiley was a big part of my musical journey, and kind of, oh, you can do both. You can make a song poetry, And then I went to college for writing, and was continuing on with this, like, oh, okay, I guess, I was in a band in high school, but that, but then I found these people, and it kind of blossomed again. And I learned to write lyrics in an entirely new, and I think more honest way, once I met them.
I love that. Zack, what about you? I mean, based on M's brief description of you before you joined the call, you're kind of a jack of all trades. You do background guitar, backing vocals. You do synth. You do a lot of writing. Also, like, where did your love of music come from? Was it just listening to music growing up, or were you playing instruments since you were a kid?
Zack of all trades.
A Zack of all trades. Oh, it was right there.
It was right there. I mean, there's perhaps a series of cliches, but they kind of operate in funny ways. Like, first of all, music, I was not raised playing a lot of instruments. No one in my family is in any way artistic. They will tell you that. I think anybody could be, but they don't want to be. So,
right.
But they're all lawyers. There's lots of arguing that would happen. So I was big on like putting my headphones in to just ignore what they're doing. And so music became the refuge, as I'm sure Miri's about to say that, and then every person you interview forever,
right, we'll always say that,
the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's true. And then my version of being like a punk, I'm breaking from the what everybody else is doing, was not to listen to like punk music or anything, but my version of that was, it's so dorky, but it was like prog rock.
Hell yeah.
And that kind of stuff. So I mean, the most important bands to me when I was in that middle school transitioning into high school era, where you basically create your musical tastes, was like the Mars Volta and Sigur Rós, but also like Yes and Genesis, all that old stuff. Anything where there was lots and lots of noodling, lots and lots of strange production choices, and I would walk around the headphones on, looking at both the kids who were just doing the, just being kids and liking the pop music on the radio, and then also the kids in high school with the big spiky punk hair and being like, y'all are posers, you don't know what the real music is. My music has arpeggios, okay? So like, I know what's up. Anyways, I think the big thing for me was when I was a senior in high school, I was in this thing called the humanities program, and you had to do a big final project. It could either be a long paper or a shorter paper with a project. And I was like, I'm going to do a project. And I convinced my parents that they needed to buy me this, like a pod, Line 6 pod to plug, my guitar into the computer, and get me a DAW and everything, because it was for school.
Right.
And then I recorded a whole album in my senior year of high school, which is like, today, that's nothing. Everybody does that. Every musician coming up does it. But at the time, that was not as common. And I made this album, and some of it's okay, and some of it's really weird. And I also, the most awkward thing about it, I was maybe trying to impress another student in the humanities program I had a crush on. And they did their this is really awkward. They did their project on human trafficking. So then I kept telling everyone that my album was it was like a concept album, prog rock. It was a concept album about human trafficking, and my teachers were like secretly writing notes about me, being like, let's keep an eye on this guy, because concept album about it. Meanwhile, I was just trying to impress somebody, but anyways, didn't work. But that was the springboard into being really focused on production, and trying to make sounds, and actually have finished products that I could share with people, which is where that 100 hours of loneliness comes from. I mentioned earlier, thousands of hours, I don't know. But slowly but surely over time, recognizing also my love of just a really good pop song, like Your Wild Nothing, though more like that kind of music, Wild Nothing. But it's pop, but it's still got some edge to it. And Symbols Eat Guitars is another band that was really big for me that nobody listens to, and you should go listen to them right now. And eventually found my way to being in several bands, and then eventually.
What about you, Miri?
Yeah, I started playing music when I was very young. I got my first guitar when I was 10. My dad is a musician. He's big into the Grateful Dead, so I was around that music a lot. Not like a lot, but like that's not necessarily really what got me into music at all, though. It was really mostly just like I wanted to be cool. And I thought that playing guitar was cool.
Sure.
So I wanted to play guitar. The only music class that was offered at my school at the time, though, was jazz. So I joined jazz, and I learned how to play jazz. I learned how to play bass in jazz ensemble. I also learned how to play drums in jazz ensemble. That was, I think, really my biggest, like, oh, this is what music is. And I think like at the time I was just like, I'm trying to get better at these instruments, but like I now can look back and realize that like that had a huge shaping of like the way that I think about like arrangement and songwriting and all of that nonsense and stuff. Like I love jazz to this day. I'll like anytime I'm practicing, I'm warming up with jazz, like things like that. I also, though, then I joined like my little high school rock band, and like we were obsessed with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So
Hell
like
yeah. Let's go.
there's a big dichotomy here. Although like Flea would argue that that's not a big dichotomy at all. Anyway, yeah, like, and then I was also like, my music taste is very all over the place. I come from jazz in the sense of playing it. I come from like rock and like funk and shit like that, from that side. But I also was like at the time, and like was not able to be open about it later, but I was listening to Taylor Swift like the entire time, and have been listening to Taylor Swift the entire time. I think she's like a great pop songwriter.
You're talking to the biggest Taylor Swift and CRJ fan you'll find. So like,
fuck yeah,
I'm with you. I think that people still making fun of them and Kesha are like so out of date and have their heads up their ass, because like they are incredible musicians who don't get enough credit.
Yeah, what do you think? You're too cool for school? Get out of here. Yeah, and like I said, and it's all over the place. But like at the same time, there's like the really important artists to me are like the sad ones. I know that M mentioned Connor Oberst. Bright Eyes was very big for me as well. Elliott Smith is maybe my all-time favorite. Yeah, I'm very all over the place like that, and so I tried to surround myself with musicians that are good enough to help me sort of fill in those gaps and connect those dots, and I think we've done a decent job here.
I mean, I think you've done an excellent job. And that's been my mantra. Like, I currently host 4 podcasts, and this is the only one I do by myself. The other 3, I have incredible co-hosts that make me look way better than I would look on my own. Like, that's always the plan. Bring in producers who are better than you, hosts that are better than you, and let them just elevate everything. It's a good strategy for those of us who are like, I'm okay. I think I'm all right. But I think what's really cool about your sound and this record specifically, I think, is that even when it ebbs and flows, like I'm glad you brought up the Chili Peppers, because like I was thinking about them earlier, just because the genres are the genres are really different, but right, like I can see the similarity in the sense that some Red Hot Chili Peppers albums, like I think of Stadium Arcadium specifically, is so all over the damn place to a point that I think it's a kind of a detriment to the second disc. But like ultimately, I respect the attempt to like do so many different things. And that's what I love so much about Hinges, is that while it does fit together really well, I think the left side and the right side are so far different but still have connecting threads. And I think I find that the most fascinating about your music, is that I can listen to the whole record and go, this all fits together, but then hear a soundscape here and a soundscape there and go, wait, these have nothing to do with each other, but it's great that they're on the same album. You know, I like people who stick to genres, and I listen to plenty of those artists too, but like people who really dabble, I think is great. And that's one of the strengths of Hinges, is that you all really dabble on that record, and it really gives it a life of its own.
You know, Matt, I never thought that this record would be compared to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, much less in a way that like I would kind of agree with. That's like a new perspective. I love when somebody gives me a new perspective on my own music.
I want to talk a bit about where you see the future of the band. Obviously, you guys have had some live shows, and you're having some more live shows coming up. I imagine you would love to tour if you can. Like, we're all kind of managing expectations as the pandemic is still going on and not quite over yet, unfortunately. But like, talk a little bit about returning to that live scene now. This record had been made in quarantine. Y'all were all locked at home. Like, talk about stepping on stage with this music and what that's been like.
It's been really great. Yeah. That's for me, at least personally, that's like a big part of why I got into this business, I guess. It's like I don't know, me, I just love it. I love a good show, you know, like
Hell yeah.
I've always have since I started going to shows in like 8th grade. And like, I love the energy. I love when there's an environment that feels like you can be in a room with strangers, but it's like, because you're all there for the same moment, there's like that sense of camaraderie. And like, sometimes you even get to the point where it's like even more than camaraderie with these strangers in these rooms. And like, that sort of energy and that community has always been like a super fascinating to me, but also just like really important to me. To have like that space to be in. And so, yes, being able to go back and playing live shows is, for me personally, like, it's been incredible.
There's also like going back to just that trust element that I think, you know, we've talked about a few times. I mean, especially with the, like, we love each other very much. I think especially with the addition of Jason, who isn't here, but he plays drums for us, that bringing that music to a stage, one, like it was really fun figuring out how, you know, because these are not things that we had ever played before in a room together before, you know, coming back to practice. So figuring out like, okay, how do we translate the weird shit that we've got like on certain songs into a live performance? But also like there has been something very different about performing on stage live since, because I think that there is kind of an overarching appreciation, because it's like we could lose this at any time, because we did lose it, you know, and performing on stage with these songs not only feels like just fantastic, like we're playing with our best friends and we're laughing, we're having a good time, but it does feel like every single one is a gift. And I think that when we perform them live, like there are times where I will make eye contact with Zack and we're both just like laughing and smiling on stage. And the same thing with Miri, and the same thing with Jason and with Chris. Like there are just moments where we get to connect on stage that are like, I'm so fucking grateful for this. And I think you can feel that every single time now, where obviously I was grateful before, but I didn't know that it was possible to lose that. And so now that we did for a second, I feel like every single show is just like this incredible present where I get to be with my friends for 45 minutes and like do the thing that we all love doing so much. It's just like that trust is a core of that.
I'm curious, Zack, if there is, like, obviously some of these songs, they're crafted in such a way that turning them making a live performance version requires some finagling. Talk a little bit about how you figure that out and the kind of planning that goes into that.
Different people have different opinions about this. My opinion that I share regularly with the band and with anyone who'll listen is that the record and the live show are like completely different mediums, just totally different. It's like the difference between, I don't know, doing a painting and doing a comic strip in the newspaper, right? They require similar skills, but they kind of have a different purpose. You're trying to do something different with it. A painting, you want somebody to stop in the museum and take in and really look at all the different colors and pay attention to every little piece of it. Notice all the hours that went into it. Whereas a comic strip in the newspaper, you want people to get it quickly and get a big kick out of it, so much so that they look forward to the next comic strip the next day, but they're not going to stare at the comic strip for hours taking in the lovely print on the paper. Right. And I think about the difference between a record and a live show in much the same way. When you have a record, it's like you can do anything you want, and maybe you should. Right. And maybe what you want is to be very minimal and just have a guitar and a voice or something. But maybe what I want to do most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, is just have a huge palette with a lot of different things. Like ear candy is, a common phrase people use. I want people to listen to it and be like, oh, I just love sinking into this experience. It's great. When you go to the show, though, you don't need all those layers. It's so loud, you're basically just getting assaulted by mid-range frequencies in many venues anyways. So really, it's just about the energy on stage. Is the music roughly similar to the album? Enough so that someone could hear it and go, that's the melody I know, that's the drum, That's why people say having a really good vocalist and a really good drummer is really the most important thing in a concert. And everybody else, myself, Miri, Chris, we're just kind of dragged along for the ride. Just like we need to be good and playing something sort of relevant to the song, the underlying songwriting. But as long as you have those main elements, people will have a good time. And just like the comic strip, they'll be like, wow, that was a great show / wow, that was funny. I can't wait for the next day when the next one comes. I want to go back.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea. And also, like, I've found, like, I love going to live shows. I missed it desperately. Funnily enough, the first concert I went to is a canceled Final Fantasy VII concert that was coming through town. Got canceled during the pandemic, and then it was for the Final Fantasy VII remake. The tour, the orchestra came through again, and I went with a buddy. And like, I mean, I'm a dork and like love that game and love the remake. And so like when they plays Aerith's theme, I was bawling with my friends, like anybody. But like, I didn't realize how much I missed being around live music until I was there. It's one of those things that's very easy to forget how integral it is. And your description of it, I think, is also key, because the best live shows I've been to are not the ones where they sound just like the record. Those are fine. Bands like Nine Inch Nails, where, Trent does most of that work and can craft the live show to be exactly he has the money and the tech to craft it to be just like the album. Great, fine, don't mind it. But like the shows where you go to see a band that's indie and like they're scrappy and like they clearly don't have the same tech live that they do in the studio, and they make it work for that live experience, I found are my most memorable shows. It's often like, I love when I see rap groups that instead of rapping over a track, which again is fine, it'll sound like the record, they rap over a live band or something. Like I've seen MC Lars a bunch of times and he travels with a band, and like it sounds so different from his record, but it still sounds good. It's just different. And so like, I love that variable. So I love that you kind of incorporated that. The analogy you brought up is perfect, right? It's like you don't need the same thing, you just want a good time.
Yeah. Another good example of that from the indie side is a big band that can do multiple nights at Anthem and whatnot. A recent band is a Big Thief. Yeah. Right. Their record is layered with all kinds of crazy sounds and nonsense. But when they play live, they do it as a 4-piece. It's 2 guitars, a bass, and a drum. Yeah. There might be some samples here and there. I don't really know, but they're playing it pretty raw, and they're playing it in, I said the Anthem as though people will know what that is. It's a very big music venue in DC. But they can play these huge rooms, and they're doing that scrappy thing, and it's what you want. Hearing Adrian Lenker's voice and the band play together, like that's what you go, oh yeah, that was rich. I didn't need all those other layers, but when I listen to the record, it enhances the experience in a very different way.
It's one of those things also, like there are bands like, I don't know if you've heard of the Death from Above 1979. But they are this like drum and bass outfit that like the first time I was told, oh, there's no guitar on this album, it's bass and drums, I went, no, fuck you, that's not possible. There's no way. In a different way that like, of course I love the White Stripes and they also did a similar thing, but like with guitar and drums often, but like it's not the same. Like and so I've always wanted to see them live because I'm like, I don't know how these two people playing just two instruments makes these noises live. And so, you know, I think it's that kind of experimentation that I totally hear in the record, and I'm excited to hopefully someday get to see live as well. Before we wrap up, I've been asking this question to a lot of my guests, talking about the pandemic and how it changes you, right? And how it influences your work. It influenced my work as well. It made me take stock of a lot of things. And I had a lot of stuff happen beyond just the pandemic itself that made the last few years difficult. And we all experienced the last 2 years and counting in very different ways. But I'm curious if each of you can speak to a little moment, a little like a silver lining that came out of the pandemic. I mean, obviously, I'm sure the band is a big part of it, but like if there's like a moment that stands out to you, big or small, that you're like, this might not have happened if I weren't home all the time, and I'm so grateful for this thing that got me through this difficult time. We can go in the same order, Zach, and then Miri.
So mine's gonna be super lame. But I started building tiny houses during.
Amazing! That's not lame. That's awesome.
I bought like 5 kits. I only finished one, but it is like my prized possession. So I was doing that intermittently with like writing lyrics. And I think that like I do think that it kind of connects into, because like I have a tendency as like a poetry major. I did it in college. I've done it all my life. I have a tendency to overwrite because I love metaphor and I love imagery. So I've known this about myself for years. I have a tendency to overwrite, but I think that part of like going between like gluing these teeny little leaves, right, to like a little piece of wire to make it look like a bush, but this big, like doing that cleared my mind enough to where then I could go, oh, well, what I had written previously in 5 sentences could be reduced down to this 1 sentence. So being able to like do this really, you know, like menial task, but also like very focused task where I had to have my mind on that the whole time, was a really nice kind of middle ground where I think that I wrote more honestly than I think I ever have before, because I simplified it a little bit more. And I for the first time in my life, I wrote songs that I just had fun with, where before it was like everything has to mean something so important. And there are a couple songs where I was like, you know what, screw it. Like I'm just going to have fun. And it ended up being some of the most enjoyable parts of that time alone.
What about you, Zach?
I mean, for me, it's all about the hours that were given back from me not having to drive to and from school, where I was like working on the PhD, and to work, to see clients in person, that everything was happening here. And so I got like a small one that I'm sure a lot of people say is that the number of hours that I got to spend with my dog that we would have not shared if life had not gone down the pandemic route is actually really nice, that you got to spend that much more time together. Are you crying?
I mean, I love Misty. You know how much I love Misty.
Misty is great.
It makes me happy.
That's the dog, by the way, for those
as someone who got a dog in the last 7 weeks, like, and he's a puppy, like, I get it. Like, he's actually, I can't show the audience, but I can show the band. He's like sleeping in his crate, just kind of behind my gate, just kind of chilling. He's either rambunctious and causing problems during a recording, or this, like, just zonked, just like out.
Yeah, my Misty is with me all the time here. This is the same setting I use when I see clients virtually. She never barks. The joke I tell my clients is that I had her sign a non-disclosure so that she won't tell anybody about anything she hears, any of their sessions. But anyways, obviously you get time back like that. But from a more artistic thing, my favorite instrument in the world is the banjo. Mm-hmm. It's an instrument that I always knew, like, I just don't have enough time to really put in to get any good at this, but I love it a lot. And I had promised myself, because I was finishing my master's, I was like, my gift to myself is going to be a banjo, and I'm going to learn it. And then the pandemic happened right as I was making that decision. And so in the last 2 years, I've drastically improved my ability to play, post videos online of me doing covers of things all the time. And now it's like, it's my favorite instrument to play. There's a little bit on the record too, if you can find it.
Nice. Excellent. That's awesome. And you, Miri?
Yeah, I went into this pandemic a very different person that I came out of it, so to speak. Yeah, I started a gender transition over the pandemic, and that was the biggest moment for me. It's just that realization and start of that process. I also released a shitload of music on Bandcamp
Nice.
because I had enough time to start just like messing around with different experimental ways to like do little like DIY recording setups and like just kind of mess around in GarageBand with different like sounds and mixing techniques and stuff like that. All of which I think culminated in where I am at now.
I love that. It's funny. I've been saying half jokingly that everyone got gayer in the pandemic, myself included. As I am now non-binary and pansexual, I went by he, him, and pronouns, and was bisexual. Which, I mean, you can argue pansexual, bisexual, right? It's all sort of the same. But like that, I think there's something that you're speaking to, Miri, that's like that time alone with yourself. We were like, I have an incredible spouse who I love very much, and over the last 2 years, both of us have come out as non-binary, and like I think it's spending time with yourself and with yourself with someone else. You can kind of look and see, oh, I never saw that, but I get it now. Like, like I did a panel for my video game podcast about queer representation in horror games, and I was talking about an old character from an old RPG being seemingly non-binary, trans femme, and like going, oh, I really like that character. Oh, I understand now why. like just that stuff kind of making sense and cracking the code. And I think like when I say people got gayer in the pandemic, it's less about sexuality, more about we all figured ourselves out a bit more, right? It gave us that time that life never gives us. And so I have to say that I am incredibly humbled and honored that all of y'all wanted to be on the pod. From the minute I heard this record, I said to Josue, I was like, I need to talk to them. Like, I love this album so much. So thank you for taking the time. Hopefully y'all can make it out to New York sometime, or I'll make it down to DC. But like, if I ever do Drinks Are On Me, like this record is incredible, and you should be incredibly proud of it. Every time someone's like, oh, is anyone like listening to anything new? I share it. And every time it comes back, this is incredible, Matt. Where did you find this? So be proud of what you made, and I hope that you continue to make more of it. And thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you so much, Matt. That means so much. Those words mean very much to me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
I would love for y'all, before we wrap up, to tell folks where you can individually be found online if you wish to be found. And then, of course, where the band and the music can be found, the best place to throw down their hard-earned money. Do as I do. For indie bands, you buy their record, and then you never listen to it on Bandcamp. You listen to it on Spotify, so they get all of your money, not just from one location. It's my hack. But share where you can be found online individually, and then, of course, the band itself and all its work.
Yeah, so we can, I am personally Burgundy_truffle on Instagram. I am Stolen Wine on Twitter. And then we are prettybitter.mp3 on Instagram. We are Pretty Bitter MP3 on Twitter because they do not allow the dots. And we also have like our link tree in our Instagram bio. So like you can find all of our music. You can find our Spotify, our Apple, all there. So the link tree is probably the way to go.
Doing the official order. I'll go next. My handle is the same everywhere. So Twitter, Instagram is really the main one I use, but Instagram, Twitter, whatever. It's BE. So BE Zack Be. So BEZACKBE. I have to spell it because otherwise people will go, I keep typing in ZACH and I don't find it. And they don't understand that ZACH and ZACK is a very different type of person.
Very different thing.
Completely. One's much softer and more put together, and the other is rowdier and better in general, which is me. So Zack Be everywhere. And I also have a website, actually, zackbe.com, if you want to find out about other music, this band, other music, and also I write science fiction and publish it and stuff, so you can find out about that there.
Yeah, and I'm at Miri_Tyler across all platforms. MIRI_Tyler, the name. That's me. Find me everywhere. Say hi.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being so generous with your time, understanding when I need to reschedule. Like, I really do cherish this time. You've made a fan for life, and I can't wait to hear the other stuff that y'all do. The last thing I'll have you do is you have a saying on this podcast. It's born out of my now on indefinite hiatus music podcast. I say indefinite hiatus because it's been done for longer than it ran at this point, but I still have high hopes that maybe someday in the future, when we all have more time, I'll bring it back. But the saying is, music is life and life is good. It's this idea that as long as you're creating, even when life gets really hard, you can still create things and feel better and feel good about those things you're making. And so I've never broken this out with 3 people. So if M can say music is, and then Zack can say life, and then Miri can say and life is good. I think I've broke that out right. Music is, then life, and then life is good. Yeah. If we can, I've overcomplicated it, but if we think we can do it and break it out.
I'm
I
so
believe
down.
in us. I believe.
Music is
Life and
Life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.matt.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.